Hello, welcome to a lecture video for ACCO30193, Strategic Tax Management. Now for this lecture video, we will be discussing financing decisions and particularly yung tax impact ng mga financing decisions na yan. Now, we expect to learn ano ba yung mga sources of financing. Saan ba maaaring kumuha ng pondo ang isang entity para sa kanyang mga activities, whether short-term or long-term activities. And tignan natin kung ano ba yung mga tax impact ng mga decision na yan. Depende ko anong source of financing ang kanyang kukunin o kanyang pipiliin, kumbaga. Now, so may dalawang uri ng sources of financing, not really uri. We have two major sources of financing. We have internal financing and external financing. Madaling intindihin kasi hindi naman alien yung mga salita na sinishare natin ngayon. Pag sabing internal financing, meaning yung source ng pondo ay galing mismo doon sa entity. So ano yung pera na meron yung whenever I say pera, kasi pag financing is not always pera, pero let's just concentrate on pera, on money. Pag kailangan niya ng pera at internal financing yung kanyang pipiliin, hindi siya lalabas sa organization. So kung ano lang yung available na resources within the organization, yun yung gagamitin niya. Yun yung kukunin niya para pondohan kung ano man yung activity na nangangailangan ng pondo. Okay, that's internal financing. With external financing naman, as the term would imply, the source of the funds or the financing will be outside the organization. So maaari siyang mangutang sa bangko, for example, or mag-issue siya ng bonds para meron siyang may mga mag-i-invest sa bonds niya, or mag-issue siya ng shares, for example. So ang point ng external financing ay yung funds na kinukuha or gagamitin ng organization is outside the entity. Na merong third person involved, merong a person other than the entity na magpo-provide ng funds. So yun yung external financing. So madali naman siyang intindihin, no? Madaling unawain. Pero para hindi tayo ma-confuse, no? Tawag dito, sa sole proprietorship, for example. Sole proprietorship. So you have this owner, no, nangangailangan siya, for example, meron siyang gustong bilihin na machinery. Yan. May gusto siyang bilhin na item of PPE, plant property or equipment. Machinery, for example. Kaya lang, yung funds niya in the meantime ay kulang at walang available na payment method na kakayanin niya. So, ang ginawa niya is nag-infuse siya ng additional capital. Nagdagdag siya. Additional capital, additional investment. So, yung sarili niyang pera, dinala niya ngayon doon sa kanyang sole proprietorship. So, ang tanong mo ngayon dyan, is that an internal financing or external financing? Iisipin mo, sole proprietorship. Tapos ang nagpondo, yung sole proprietor din. That would mean it's an form of internal financing. Kung iisipin ng ganun. So doon maaari magkaroon ng kalituhan with respect to a sole proprietorship. Kapag ganyan kasi, diba, we learned naman that a sole proprietorship does not acquire its a separate juridical personality. Totoo naman yun. Diba? Kung ano yung assets ng sole proprietor, yun din yung assets ng owner. Kung ano yung liabilities ng owner, yun din yung liabilities ng sole proprietor. Diba? Yun yung nature ng isang sole proprietorship. Hindi siya nag-acquire ng separate juridical personality. na kapag iniisip mo, kapag iisipin mo na, ay, yung sarili niyang pera ang ginamit niya para pondohan yung pagbili ng machinery na gusto niyang bilhin, iisipin mo, ay, internal financing yan. Well, in fact, hindi. It's not internal financing but external financing. Bakit? Ba't siya naging external financing? Sa kanya rin naman galing yun. Okay. Meron tayong generally accepted accounting principle. No? I hope naaalala ninyo to from your basic accounting. Although sa batas, hindi siya nakaka-acquire ng separate juridical personality, meron tayo sa GAAP na tinatawag na business entity concept. Ano tong business entity concept na ito? Nag-a-apply even for sole proprietorship. No? Pag sinabing business entity concept, you have to separate yung treatment noong sole proprietor from the owner. Hindi ibig sabihin nagkakaroon siya ng separate juridical personality, but for purposes of accounting, iba yung hiwalay dapat yung pera nung sole owner doon sa pinut up niya na sole proprietorship business. Hindi mo dapat sila pinagsasama. So, ibig sabihin, kung gagawa ka ng financial statements mo for that sole proprietorship, yung cash appearing in the balance sheet should pertain to the cash of that sole proprietorship and not including the personal cash of the owner. In the same way na yung liabilities ng sole proprietorship, dapat ang ilalagay mo lang doon ay yung liabilities niya and not including the liabilities, personal liabilities of the owner. Kasi hindi naman, for example, that's supplier, hindi naman personal obligation ng sole proprietor yung utang ng sole proprietorship ng business. Although yun nga, legally, kung batas ng pag-uusapan natin, yes, kung ano man yung magiging utang ng sole proprietorship, maaaring habulin yung sole owner. But does not mean that for accounting purposes, pagsasamahin mo na yung assets ng company with the assets of yung assets ng sole proprietorship doon sa assets ng owner or yung liabilities nila. So in case, going back to our example, in case yung sole owner, ginamit niya yung pera niya, sarili niyang pera, to infuse additional capital doon sa kanyang sole proprietorship para magamit niya yung pera na yun kung ano man yung purpose niya, which is in our example ay may plano siyang bilhin na item of machinery, then that is an external financing. Okay. So, nandito pala yung definition na internal financing pertains to internal sources of finance, which refers to fundraising options that exist within the business itself. So, examples would be day-to-day profit-boosting operations, such as the sale of stock. Pag sinabing stock, hindi shares, yung stock dito ay yung merchandise. So, ito yung entity. So, meron siyang merchandise inventory. So, itong merchandise inventory na yan, nabenta niya kay X, for example. Si X ngayon, nagbayad. Let's say, for example, meron siyang binayad na 200,000. So, itong 200,000 na to, pera yan ng entity. Kung sakaling gagamitin yan, for example, ipang-down natin siya to purchase this photocopy machine. So, ano naging source ng financing mo? Internal. Kasi ginamit mo yung pondo or yung pera ng kumpanya. Or, it also, as also an example of internal financing, ay proceeds from the sale of business assets. So, for example, yung bibili natin, photocopy machine. For example, yung photocopy machine na yan ay eventually gusto mag-upgrade ng company, ng sole proprietorship, o kung ano man, partnership or corporation. Iniisip nila, pag nag-upgrade tayo, anuhin natin itong lumang photocopy. Good pa naman siya, working pa naman siya. Sayang naman kung itatapon lang natin. Magiging useless siya or itambak lang natin. So might as well, para mapondohan natin yung pagbili natin ng bagong, more high-tech na photocopy machine, ibenta natin itong lumang photocopy machine. So binenta nila to, for example, kay X na lang din. So si X ngayon, magbabayad siya. Let's see, magbabayad siya 50,000. So, yung 50,000, yung ginamit nila to fund yung panibagong photocopy machine. So, ano yung naging source of financing? Internal. Kasi ginenta nila yung assets ng business, ng entity, yung pinagbentahan, yun yung naging pondo, yun yung naging fund. Also, an example of internal financing ay undisbursed retained earnings. So I hope you are all familiar with what retained earnings mean. Di ba? Ano to? Dito napupunta, kilala natin ito bilang account. Sige, gawin na natin account yan. Isa siyang account, no, kung saan yung profits ng isang corporation ay nag-accumulate. Nag-accumulate siya. So parang from a nominal account, napupunta siya sa real account by way of the retained earnings. Kasi we have to close every accounting cycle yung nominal accounts, yung revenue at saka yung expense accounts. And every time na i-close mo sila, kung meron kang income, that would increase your retained earnings. Kung meron kang loss, that would reduce your retained earnings. Retained earnings, so if you can think about it, retained earnings is actually not an asset account. Diba? Hindi siya asset, equity account siya. Andun siya sa credit side eh. But every time, kung iisipin mo mas malalim kung paano ba gumagana yung retained earnings account, meron siyang counterpart sa asset. Diba? Kung tumataas yung equity mo, kung tumataas yung retained earnings mo, dalawa lang yan. Dalawa yung possibility. Tumataas din dapat, syempre sa accounting equation natin, tumataas din dapat yung assets account mo. Or, bumababa yung liabilities account mo, or bumababa yung other equity account. Yan. So kung iisipin mo, on the point of view of the operations, kung operations ang titig na pag-iisipan mo mabuti dito, kung tumataas yung retained earnings mo, it must be that nakakapagbenta siya, either on account or for cash. Let us see for cash yan. Every time na nagbebenta siya, di ba, debit cash, credit, revenue from sales. Tapos eventually, itong revenue from sales na ibabawas na yung expenses, yun yung papasok sa retained earnings. But every time na naka-credit yung sales account niya, naka-debit palagi yung cash. So parang may tie-up siya. Parang habang lumalaki yung retained earnings, ini-expect mo dapat, syempre, although hindi palagi ito, pero meron kang expectation na tumataas yung assets niya. It might be tumataas yung cash niya, or kung palaging on account yung kanyang transaction, tumataas yung accounts receivable niya, etc. etc. Or tumaas yung cash niya, tapos napabili niya ng merchandise inventory para may maibenta siya uli, tumataas yung balance ng merchandise inventory. Anyway, let us concentrate on financing. Para makuha natin yung konsepto nito, tumataas yung retained earnings, let us just assume na puro cash yan by way of cash. Again, hindi siya palaging cash, pero let us just assume in the meantime na yung pumapasok sa retained earnings, merong corresponding increase in the cash account. So just imagine, yung retained earnings tumataas, yung cash mo ngayon tumataas. Kanino yan? Since retained earnings ang pinag-uusapan natin, it belongs to the corporation. It does not belong to the stockholders or to anyone else. It belongs to the corporation itself. So kung magkano man yung balance ng retained earnings, which we are assuming in the meantime na may corresponding cash, na wala siyang equivalent na cash sa balance sheet natin, yung cash na yon ay pag-aamamay-ari ng korporasyon. So kung for example, sabi niya, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, patayo na tayong sarili nating building. Huwag na tayong mangupahan. Medyo lumalaki na yung kumpanya natin, bili natin yung building na yan, or patayo tayo ng building. Ano gagamitin natin? Medyo malaking capital outlay yan. Again, question of financing na naman yan. Saan tayo kukuha ng pondo? Tignan mo naman yung balance ng retained earnings natin, ang taas-taas niya na. Pwede natin i-appropriate, no? I hope you are familiar with the concept of appropriation. Pwede natin i-appropriate or i-set aside yung portion ng retained earnings para mapondohan yung plano natin na magpatayo ng sarili nating building or bumili ng naitayo ng building, whatever it is na gusto nilang gawin. So what kind of financing is that? Internal financing. Kasi ginamit nila yung pondo ng korporasyon na tinignan nila sa retained earnings, which in our example is tied up with cash. But again, to reiterate, retained earnings is not always tied up to cash. Huwag mong expect na kung meron kang balance na retained earnings na 5 million, meron kang cash balance na 5 million. That is not always the case. And it hardly happens. Hindi nga ganun palagi. Pero the idea is there. No? The idea is there. External financing, so external sources of finance, are those that come outside of the business. Siyempre, kaya nga siya external. So example of which would be money that comes from loans, from bank, no? Punta ka sa bangko, or mag-issue ka ng, tawag dito, bonds. Kasi, di ba, ikaw yung bonds. Ikaw yung mangungutang, correct? Issue ka ng bonds eh. So, loans yun. Or, through investors. So, meron kang available na shares, stocks and shares, yan. So, yan. Mag-issue ka ng shares or stocks. Issue ka ng, tatatanggap ka ngayon ng investment, no? Which is by way of cash. Although, not always by way of cash. Pero, yun nga, since financing ang topic natin ngayon, doon na tayo mag-concentrate sa cash. Again, investment may be cash or non-cash, possible yan. But since you are talking about financing, yung pag nag-issue ka ng shares or ng bonds, bibigyan ka ng pera. Line of credit, sa bangko ito. You apply for line of credit with a bank. So every time na may kailangan ka, you can always withdraw from the line of credit. It's different from bank deposit kasi bank deposit may pondo. Kailangan mo siyang pondohan. Kapag nag-issue ka ng cheque kasi walang pondo, magbabounce yung check mo. NSF siya. Pag line of credit, mag-issue ka ng cheque kahit walang pondo, igugod yan ng bangko. Kasi nga meron kang line of credit with that arrangement, line of credit arrangement with that bank. Which is usually backed up by a mortgage. Yan. So yung line of credit na yan can be opened with banks or financial institutions. Okay? Hopefully with that discussion and examples, we are able to understand the nature of internal and external financing. Now, let us compare them. Starting with non-tax considerations. So here, we are trying to compare yung advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons rather, ng internal financing and external financing without referring to the tax implication. Mamaya na yung tax implication. In the meantime, pag-usapan muna natin yung non-tax consideration. Kasi syempre, you are a strategic tax manager, you are a tax manager. Hindi lang yung tax ang i-consider mo dyan. Baka marami pang ibang kailangan i-consider. Gaya nito, mga non-tax considerations natin. First ay, for internal financing, it is easier to avail. Bakit? Siyempre, sarili mo yan, kausap mo eh. Talagang madaling i-avail yan. For example, lumaki na yung pondo ng korporasyon. O gamitin ba natin to? Hindi mo kailangan manghingi ng consent from outside the organization. Hindi ko sinasabi na palaging okay lang ng okay. May pera, sige, okay lang, go. Hindi ganon. We are just trying to compare yung internal financing with external financing. So just imagine, external financing is subject to voluminous documentation. If you try to obtain a loan from a bank, sandamakmak na documentation ang kailangan mo i-provide sa kanila bago ka maaprubahan ng loan. Or if you will try to issue shares to the public, marami kang pagdadaanan bago mo ma-offer to the public yung shares mo. Unlike internal financing, for example, sole proprietor ka, yung pinakamadali ditong tanong, sole proprietor ka, may pera dito, kailangan ko magbayad ng, let's say, ng amortization ng loan. Pag internal financing, may pera dito, gagamitin ko ba ito? Ikaw lang kausap na doon. Makokontrahin mo pa yung sarili mo, hindi wag ganito. Nagiging dual personality ka na. No? Pag internet finance, madali lang yan. No? O pag nag-decide ka, sige na, gamitin ko na nga yung kinita kahapon para bayaran yung utang bukas. So, pirma ka na lang ng cheque. That's it. That's how easy it is. No? Or kung meron kang internal conflict, bahala ka, mag-shower ka muna, hot shower. Tapos mag-tsaka ka, mag-contemplate ka kung i-grant mo ba o hindi yung sarili mong request. No? Sarili mong request yun. Kung ano na pang pinagdadaanan mo. Unlike external financing, meron kang kausap eh. Someone from outside the organization, bangko. Naku, ang daming requirements ng bangko. Lending institution, ang daming requirements niyan. Or financial institution, naku, kung ano nangihingin sa'yo niyan. Tapos after mong i-provide lahat, after mong ibigay ang lahat, walang kapalit. Hindi ka, di-disapprove ka pa rin pala niya. Possible pa ma-disapprove. For internal financing, pag di-disapprove mo yung sarili mo, iba na yun. Alam mo na available yung pondo, di-disapprove mo pa yung sarili mo. Anyway, so that's it for the first. Pangalawa, timing can be easily controlled. Since ikaw lang ang magde-decide dito, for example, bayaran ko ba yung utang, yung amortization due next month? Babayaran ko ba? Kung ikaw lang magde-decide, kayang-kaya mong kontrolin yan. Diba? Kasi ikaw ngayon magde-decide, solo mo eh, or the corporation itself, kung pera niya yung sarili niya at wala namang ibang mangingialam doon sa pondo niya, then kaya mong i-program yung timing kung kailan mo ilalabas yung pera. Especially kung alam mo rin kung kailan may papasok na pera. Siyempre sa budgeting aspect na yun. Ibang usapan yun. Pero dito, pag sinabi natin financing, the timing can easily be controlled. Kaya mong i-delay pa nga minsan eh. For example, you are planning to purchase an equipment. No? Iniisip mo, bibiliin ko na ba ngayon? Kung internal financing ang gagamitin mo, pwede mong tanungin yung sarili mo, ngayon na ba? Or 2 years from now? Or 3 years from now? Pwede mong gawin yun. Kasi pwede mong i-program yung sarili mong pondo. Eh. Unlike external financing, since dependent yung magiging pondo mo doon sa approval or disapproval kung sakali ng isang bangko or financial institution or entity which is external to the organization, hindi mo siya basta-basta lang mapoprogram ng ganun. Kasi hindi mo naman sure kung bibigyan ka ba niya o hindi. So for example, ganito yung plano mo. Hey, bibili ako ng high-tech na photocopy machine. Bibiliin ko yan. Magasalita lang ako, photocopy. Ganun. Gagawin niya na. Gusto ko yan. Pero wala akong pondo ngayon. So, bibiliin ko to. Siguro magmumura to in 3 years time. Magmumura yan. Bababa yung presyo. Hindi magmumurang bad words. No? Bababa yung presyo niya in 3 years time. And by that time, wala pa rin akong pera. Pero uutang ako sa bangko. Kung ganun yung plano mo, naku, delikado yan. Delikado. Ngayon ka nagpa-plan, 3 years time, bibiliin ko yan. Gamit yung uutangin ko sa bangko. Baka pag nag-apply ka after 3 years, no? Expecting na i-grant niya agad yung utang mo para mabili mo agad yung immediately yung yung pinaplano mong high-tech photocopy machine. Wala na. No? Yung pag-ipon mo pa lang ng mga dokumento na kailangan para i-submit, matagal na yun. Iisa-isahin pa nila yan to check kung legit ba yung mga sinabit mo sa kanila. Marami pang approval na pagdadaanan. Or kung ma-approve ka man ng nasa tamang oras, sapat ba yung ma-approve? Baka mababa yung in-apply, mataas yung in-apply mo, mababa lang yung ma-approve. So hindi mo makontrol. No? Sabi natin, timing is unpredictable. So baka i-approve niya, pero you have to wait for 2 years. Medyo mahaba yun, no? Pero it's a possibility. No? Medyo OA yung example na utang ako ngayon kasi approval is 5 years pa from now. Medyo medyo OA yung mga ganung example. Pero just to make it clear, no? Just to make the distinction na unlike internal financing, kayang-kaya mong kontrolin yan. Kasi yung approval mo lang ang kailangan kung ilalabas na ba yung pera o hindi. Unlike external financing, na ang daming factors and risk involved. No? For example, ang external financing mo ay through the issuance of shares o offer mo to the public yung shares mo. Siyempre, daming pagdadaanan na documentation with the PSE, no? Philippine Stock Exchange, for your IPO. And you are not even sure kung may mag-i-invest ba sa'yo o may mag-invest ba o wala. Diba? So, napaka-risky ng mga ganun na kung ganun yung magiging plano mo na, sige, okay lang, bibilihin ko yan 5 years from now kasi by that time nakakapag-IPO na ako, by that time may pondo na. Napaka tawag dito? Unpredictable, not unpredictable, futuristic mo mag-isip, no? Para kang si Nostradamus, iniisip mo yan, mangyayari yung gusto mong mangyari. Eh meron kang ibang katransact dito. And these are all beyond your control. Hindi mo control kahit gaano pa kaganda yung credit standing mo. Hindi mo control yung bangko na i-grant yung application mo for loan in the amount na gusto mo. In the same way na kahit maganda yung business model mo, you cannot expect the public na magtitiwala, mag-invest doon sa kumpanya mo. It's unpredictable. So, i-consider mo yan. Hindi ng advice lang ng advice. Makakatipid po tayo ng tax dito. Hindi naman pala mangyayari kasi wala naman palang approval na magaganap. Kung mag-concentrate ka sa tax, ito po gawin natin to, maliit ang tax dito sa external financing. Sige, gawin na natin. Then eventually, after 5 years, ano na pa nangyayari sa financing? Wala, pending pa rin. Anong kwenta ng advice mo? Diba? Anong kwenta ng advice mo na makakatipid tayo ng tax? In the first place, hindi mo mapapalabas-labas yung pondo. Anyway, let us go to another non-tax consideration. Less transaction cost. Minsan nga wala pa. No, kung internal financing yan, why would you charge yourself for transaction cost? Pera mo na nga yun. Diba? O mag-withdraw tayo natin sa bank account natin. Bank account ng company. Alam mo, i-charge mo yung sarili mo o para dyan sa transaction na yan. I will charge you this much. Unlike external financing, may mga transaction cost talaga yan. Kasi may mga i-execute kang contracts, may mga kailangan kang documents na i-secure from government offices, isubmit mo yan sa banko and the bank will have to charge you with transaction cost kasi ipaprocess na yung application mo . At kapag process na yung application mo, meron siyang mga gagastusin. At syempre, isisigilin niya sa iyo yun by way of charging you with transaction cost. Yan. So, kung nyari meron kang document na kailangan ipanotaryo, transaction cost yun. Kung meron kang kung may babayaran kang documentary stamp tax, transaction cost yan. Which is bulky kapag external financing. Pag internal, again, konti lang yan. No? Baka nga, wala pa. Okay. Another non-tax consideration for internal financing is that it is not subject to payout. Doon muna tayo, payout restrictions. Ibig sabihin, pag galing sa pondo mo, pag sarili mong pera, yung pondo, hindi mo iisipin na mag-charge ng interest or obliga mo yung sarili mo na magbayad ng dividends. Diba? Kasi compared sa external financing, meron kang payout restriction. For example, ang pinili mo ay, I will obtain a loan from the bank. External financing yun. You should expect na hindi libre yung pagpapautang ng banko sa'yo or ng financial institution or ng lending institution. Pag pinautang ka nila, you should expect na magbabayad ka ng interest. So meron kang payout restriction. So you have to plan ahead. Isipin mo, mangutang ako ngayon, if I will pay this 3 years from now, 5 years from now, I have to be equipped or be ready na magbayad not only nung principal na inutang ko, but also nung add-on interest. So kung sa tingin mo hindi mo kakayanin yung obligasyon na ibalik yung principal together with the interest, then external financing may not be for you. Or if on the other way, the other side of external financing, kung equity ang pipiliin mo, maaaring merong dividend na kailangan i-declare. Although dividends nga is not naman really tawag dito, guaranteed. No? Dividends not guaranteed. Unlike interest, yung interest, guaranteed talaga yan. Tatakbo lang yung oras, meron kailangan bayaran na interest. But with dividends, may yan, dependent yan kung meron bang kinita o wala, kung meron bang available na unrestricted retained earnings para makapag-declare ng dividends. Diba? So anyway, ganun uli, isipin mo. Kapag equity yung financing ko, I might be compelled to declare dividends. Although, again, you may not be compelled, pero you have to think about it. Na merong cost itong pinipili mo na external financing. And then finally, non-tax consideration, walang control, no? Not subject to control restrictions ang internal financing. Kasi sarili mo yun, so walang dilution of control over your company. Unlike external financing, syempre pag sole proprietorship, wala ka namang i-associate dyan. Pero kung partnership yan, or corporation, kapag partnership yan, syempre, kapag meron kang in-admit na new partner to your partnership, nadadilute yung control. Nadidistribute yung control. Medyo bumababa yung control over the company. Kasi nga, merong additional na partner na nag-infuse ng capital. Or in case of a corporation, syempre meron man tayong tinatawag na preemptive rights. Bago ibenta sa labas yung mga unissued shares, i-offer siya muna sa'yo para magkaroon ng control restriction. Para mabawasan rather yung control restriction. Sa'yo muna i-offer. Kung hindi, ibibigay siya sa iba or i-offer siya sa iba. Pag nabili ng third person yung shares of stocks na yan, syempre mag-dilute yung control. So for example, initially you have 20% interest over the company, over the corporation, dahil may mga bagong initial na shares at hindi mo in-exercise yung preemptive right mo, maaari na yung interest mo bumaba to, let's say, 18% or 17%. Syempre, merong additional shares eh. So, magdadilute ngayon yung control over the company because of an external financing. Wala namang control restriction sa utang kasi mga creditors naman, wala naman silang say on how to manage the affairs of a corporation. Pero yung mga stockholders, yan, kapag nag-issue ka ng share sa kanila at nag-decide sila na tumakbo sa board of directors, pwede yun kasi stockholders sila, di ba? One of the rights of being a stockholder is for you to be able to run or to be nominated in a seat sa board of directors. Pag naging board of directors ka, you are exercising the corporate powers, no? Yung samahan ninyo ang nag-exercise ng powers of that corporation. So merong control restriction pagdating sa external financing, particularly on equity financing. Okay? So hopefully naintindihan natin itong mga non-tax considerations natin. Meron pa ba ka dito? Wala na. Ano na? Tax consideration na. Let's start with internal financing. Ano ba yung tax consideration with internal financing? Actually, it is limited on the timing. No, kasi hindi siya kagaya ng external financing that you have to consider interest, dividends, etc., etc. Hindi nag-exist yan kay internal financing. You don't have an obligation to pay interest or obligation to pay dividends. So how do you take advantage of internal financing? Kung tax consideration na yung ating pag-uusapan, ang sagot mo dyan ay you control the timing. Diba sabi nga natin, isa sa mga advantage ng internal financing ay kaya mong i-control yung timing. Kasi sa'yo naman magagaling yung pondo eh. Kung alam mong available na yung pondo, it's just a matter of saying, kailan ko ito gagawin? Kailan ko itutuloy yung plano ko? Yan. Pero by the way, no, let's go back to non-tax consideration before we proceed with the problem. Nakalimutan kong banggitin that with internal financing, medyo limited yung pondo mo. Kung ano lang yung kaya, kung ano lang meron actually, yung company, yun lang yung magiging capacity mo as financing. But external financing, essentially is unlimited. Essentially. Siyempre, meron siyang may limitation yan. Generally, not essentially. Generally, unlimited yan. Kung kaya mo mangutang ng mangutang at kaya mo silang i-convince na pautangin ka, then sky's the limit, di ba? Unless ma-figure out nila, oh, hanggang ganito lang pwede kong ipautang sa'yo. Or shares of stocks. Yung shares of stocks naman kasi meron kang authorized capital stocks. So hanggang doon ka lang din talaga. But with external financing by way of debt financing, then medyo unlimited. Medyo unlimited yung amount that you can secure as long as tiwala pa rin sa'yo yung bangko or yung financial or lending institution. Generally, yung external financing ay unlimited. So, yun yung disadvantage ng internal. Limited lang talaga yan kung ano yung amount na maaaring na-spend. Now, let's go to this example. This is a control of the timing. Example, an entity intends to purchase a property with a cost of 1 million pesos. Estimated useful life, 5 years. Okay. The tax rate for years 1 and 2 is 30%, years 3 and 4 is 25%, and year 5 onwards is 20%. What is the net benefit or net cost of delaying the purchase to the 3rd year or to the 5th year? Okay. So meron kang bibilin daw na property ngayon. Ngayon mo na siya gustong bilhin. Pero iniisip mo, is it feasible since kaya mo namang kontrolin may pondo ka na ngayon Just a matter of saying, sige, hindi ko muna to gagamitin. Ano na lang muna. Sa year 2 ko na lang bibilhin or sa year 3 ko na lang bibilhin or sa year 5 ko na lang bibilhin. So what is the net benefit or net cost of delaying the purchase to year 3 or year 5? Before we answer this problem, I want you to understand the concept of tax benefit. Yung tinatanong niya, benefit Tax benefit. Okay. Kailangan natin mapaglaruan or maintindihan, hindi natin lalaruin. Kailangan natin maintindihan ng mabilis. Actually, mabilis talaga dapat. In a snap, yung effect ng isang item sa tax liability ng isang company or ng isang entity. Okay. Meron kasi yung relationship. Ano yung relationship natin? Makikichismis tayo. Yung relationship direct or indirect. Okay. How do we compute for tax liability? Or let's say income tax. We start with gross income. Meron kang amount ng gross income dyan. And then meron kang allowed deductions. So, negative, pabawas yan, syempre. Allowed deductions, mga expenses mo yan. Then you have taxable net income. For a better understanding, for a better appreciation ng concept ng tax benefit, let us assume na corporation ito. And under the create bill, ang rate natin ay 25%. Unless yung taxable net income mo ay 5 million lamang at yung total assets mo ay hindi lumalagpas ng 100 million. Taxable net income hindi lumalagpas ng 5 million, yung assets mo ay hindi lumalagpas ng 100 million. In which case, 20% lang yung tax rate mo. But that is an exception. The general rule is that the tax rate is 25% of taxable net income. We will arrive at the tax due. If you multiply the taxable net income by 25%, we will arrive at the tax due. Okay. Let us talk about gross income para maintindihan natin yung flow niya. If your gross income will increase by 100 pesos, if your gross income will increase by 100 pesos, what is the effect of that increase of 100 pesos to your taxable net income. No? Siyempre, by algebraic rules, natuto natin sa math that it will also increase by 100 pesos. Diba? Kasi direct yung kanilang relationship. Diba? Direct yung relationship ng gross income sa taxable net income. Kapag tumataas yung gross income, tataas din yung taxable net income. Tama ba? Siyempre. Na hindi pwede na tumaas yung gross income, pinapataas yung gross income. Ang effect niya sa taxable net income bumababa. That will not happen. Every peso na pinapasok mo sa gross income, tumataas din by the same peso yung taxable net income. Anong effect niyan sa tax due? Siyempre yung effect niya will only be 25% of the increase. Your tax due now will increase by 25 pesos. Siyempre tumaas yung gross income by 100, tumaas yung taxable net income by 100, tataas yung tax due mo by 25 lang. Hindi pwedeng 100 din taas sa tax due mo. Kasi dadaan siya sa tax rate na 25%. Okay, balik rin natin ngayon. If your gross income will reduce or will reduce by 100 pesos, what will happen to your taxable net income? It will also be reduced by 100 pesos. What will happen to your tax due? It will reduce by 25 pesos. So if you will think about it, if you will think about, makapagano ka talaga sa noo, if you will think about it, merong benefit ang pagbaba ng income. Siyempre, sa financial accounting, hindi. Diba? Kung ang ano mo, ang aim mo ay magkaroon ng profit, you don't like na yung gross income ay bumababa. Diba? Pag bumababa kasi yung gross income mo, yung minimeasure mong net income, bababa din yan. But for tax purposes, beneficial to. Na beneficial yung pagbaba ng gross income. Bakit? Kasi pag bumaba yung gross income mo, bababa yung tax due by 25 pesos. Yun yung tax benefit doon. Ang tax benefit ng pagbaba ng gross income ay merong resulta na pagbaba ng tax due. That is the concept of tax benefit. If you are talking about gross income. Now, let us talk about allowed deductions. If your allowed deduction will increase by, let's say, it will increase by 200 pesos. What will happen to your taxable net income if your allowed deductions will increase by 200? Siyempre, baliktad ang effect. Baliktad yung effect. If your allowed deductions will increase by 200 pesos, your taxable net income will decrease by 200 pesos. If your taxable net income will decrease by 200 pesos, what will happen to the tax due? It will decrease by how much? 50 pesos. Bumaba yung tax due mo. Again, sa financial accounting, if you will think about, tumataas yung expense, problema to, ba't tumataas yung expense? Lumilit yung income natin. Siyempre, problemahin. Pero sa point of view ng tax, yung pagtaas ng allowed deductions na yan, ay merong benefit. Bakit? Kasi every time na tumataas yung allowed deductions, bumababa yung tax due. Reverse kasi yung kanilang, inverse yung kanilang relationship. Indirect, no? Inversely proportional. Every time na tumataas yung allowed deduction, bumababa yung taxable net income, bumababa din yung tax due. So meron kang tax benefit every time na tumataas yung deductions. Okay? Sana naintindihan natin to. Now, let us put an amount dito. Meron ba akong, wait lang, check ko kung may slide ba ako ng null. Net operating loss. Meron pala. Meron tayong tinatawag na net operating loss. Alam niyo yan sa tax 1. Buburahin ko muna to. Nagkakaroon ng net operating loss kapag yung allowed deductions mo ay mas mataas na sa gross income. So for example, you have allowed deductions in the amount of 2 million. You have gross income amounting to 1.7 million. So you have net operating loss of 300,000. Negative na siya. Okay, negative na. Dahil net operating loss na yan, wala kang basic corporate income tax. So wala kang basic corporate income tax dito. No, zero basic corporate income tax. Siyempre, saan mo multiply yung 25% mo? Wala, negative siya. Hindi ka naman pwede mag-multiply ng negative ng 25% doon sa negative amount. Pero meron kang MCIT, which is computed based on the gross income. Right now, MCIT is at 1%. So kung 1.7 million yan, ang 1%, hindi natin alam to. Ang 1% ay 17,000. Applying our knowledge, kung meron, sa income taxation, if you have basic corporate income tax na 0 at MCIT na 17,000, ano ang kanyang liability? MCIT. MCIT ka, 17,000. Whichever is higher. Okay. Now, paglaruan natin yung tax benefit. Kung meron. Oo, meron. For example, you are now in this decision making about financing at meron siyang effect sa allowed deductions mo. Okay. Iniisip mo, may available kang interest expense. Yan. Yung nasa subject matter natin to eh. Interest expense in the amount of 100,000. Ito yung kinoconsider natin ngayon. Applying yung natutunan natin about tax benefit, yung kanina lang na pinag-aralan natin, and discuss ko. Kung mapapataas ko yung interest expense ko by 100,000, ibig sabihin, mapapababa ko ang taxable net income by 100,000. Ibig sabihin din, mapapababa ko yung tax due ko by 25,000. Diba ganun yung concept? Okay. Kaya lang, sa sitwasyon na to, nasa net operating loss ka na. Tignan mo, 2 million na yung allowed deductions mo, which is already beyond your gross income, 1.7 million. In fact, you are now at negative 300,000. Kung dadagdagan mo yung allowed deductions mo by 100,000, magiging 2.1 million siya, what will happen to your net operating loss? It will only be adjusted from 300,000 negative to 400,000. So magiging 400,000 to. Kung siya ay magiging 400,000, magkano yung basic corporate income tax mo? 0 pa rin. Hindi siya magbabago. Whether 300 or 400 or negative 500 or negative 10 trillion, your basic corporate income tax will be 0. Ano pong liability ko? MCIT pa rin. But the MCIT is computed based on gross income. And it is not affected by the changes in your allowed deductions. Tumaas man o bumaba yung allowed deductions mo, if you have gross income of 1,700,000, your MCIT will always be 17,000. So in that case, if the company is already in the net operating loss side of taxation, wala nang tax benefit ang expenses. Kung nasa net operating loss na ang isang company, wala nang tax benefit ang expenses. Hindi mo na kailangang isipin na pag in-expense ko to, tataas yung aking allowed deductions. Bababa yung aking taxable net income. Bababa yung tax due ko. Hindi mo na kailangang isipin yun. Bakit? Wala ka nang tax due in the first place. Ano pang papababain mo? MCIT ka din. Ano si ID? Okay? So hopefully we are able to understand the concept of tax benefit. Sana naintindihan natin. Okay? Now let's go to this problem. Isa basahin ulit natin. No? Yung entity, meron siyang planong bilhin. Ngayon na actually. Pero niya nang bilhin ngayon, 1 million. Okay. Useful life is 5 years. Okay. Iba-iba yung tax rate. So dito ka ngayon maglalaro sa mga tax rate na yan. Ano yung benefit or cost of delaying the purchase to year 3 or to year 5? Okay? So para mas madali tayo mag-compute, let us pull our Excel. So ngayon, meron siya kino-contemplate na bilhin ngayon. That's year 0. Tata ng buy now, yan yung una niyang yan yung una niyang option. So meron siyang minus 1 million. Yan. Itong minus 1 million niya ba ay merong tax benefit? The answer is wala. Bakit walang tax benefit to? Kasi it's a capital expenditure. And capital expenditure, you record it as an asset, wala siyang direct effect sa income statement. It will not increase or decrease your revenue. It will not increase or decrease your expense. So wala siyang tax benefit. Ito tax benefit. Zero. Okay. Year 1. Ano ang mapapala niya dito? Yan. Ano mapapala niya dito? Depreciation. Ang sabi ng problem, meron daw siyang 5 years useful life. Correct ba? So that's 200,000. Correct, 200,000. So kung tataas yung kanyang depreciation by 200,000, may tax benefit ba yun? O, kaya diniscuss ko yung kanina, yung tax benefit para alam agad natin, oo, may tax benefit. Kasi pag nag-record ka ng depreciation by 200,000, it will reduce your taxable net income by 200,000. And if the tax rate for year 1 ay 30%, then meron kang tax benefit na 60,000. Correct. Year 2. So same pa rin. 200,000 pa rin. At syempre, 60,000 pa rin yung tax benefit. Year 3, 200,000 pa rin yung kanyang depreciation. But this time, 25% na lang yung tax benefit. Year 4, ganun ulit. 200,000 with tax benefit of 25%. And year 5, 200,000 again. With tax benefit of only 20%. Okay. Okay. So what you can do if you will disregard tax value of money, ang tax benefit nito ay 260,000. If we will compute, if we will consider the tax value of money, let us assume na 10% yung required rate of interest, then ang gagawin mo, ito ay times 1.1 raised to negative 3. Paano yun? 1 divided by 1.1. Yan. Tama ba yan? Hindi ako marunong mag-Excel. So ito, divided by times 1 over 1.1 over 1.1. Yan. Times 1 over 1.123. Hindi ako marunong. Pag-aaralan ko to. Promise. Para mabilis tayo next time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then ito, present value niya ay 1, 2, 3, 4. Yan. So, ang present value niya, syempre mas liliit, 200,685.5. Okay. What if by in year 3? Pag binili niya in year 3 yan, syempre ito wala pa rin tax benefit. Pero mag-start siya dito, 200,000. I-adjust na lang natin. Maganda na lang pa. Ganito na lang to. Mag-move yung depreciation niya. So, kung year 3 niya bibilihin yung property, year 3 mag-i-start yung depreciation. Year 3 magsimula yung kanyang tax benefit. Okay? Dahil sa year 3, 25%, 25% din to. Year 5, 20%. So, ito times 0.2. Itanin ulit. Yan. So, umurong. I-delay niya. So, ang tax benefit disregarding the time value of money, 220. 220. Bakit? Kasi nilagay niya, ganun talaga yung magiging effect ng magiging effect nun. Kasi inurong mo yung tawag ito, yung pagbili doon sa period na mas mababa yung tax rate. Kasi kung ililipat mo yung expense doon sa mga period, sa mga year, na mas mababa yung tax rate, you can expect na mas mababa yung tax benefit. Diba? So, mas beneficial kung expense ang pinag-uusapan, ha? Mas beneficial kung dadalhin mo yan sa, ano siya dadalhin? Dadalhin mo siya sa mas mataas na tax rate. So, dito, ang magiging, mo, ay 168,986. And then, buy in year 5. So, dito pala magsimula ang iyong tax benefit. Ay, tama. Yung depreciation mo sa year 5. So, dito, puro 20,000 na lang. Ay, mali. Hindi pala. 20% rather. Times 0.2. Mas lalong bababa yung tax benefit without the time value of money. If yan ay ating the time value of money, yan, sobrang liit na yan, 155. Ang liit ng tax benefit. Tax benefit. So, if disregarding time value of money, 260 minus 220. Yan. So, more beneficial na bilhin mo na siya ngayon kasi meron kang 40,000 na additional tax benefit. If you will, to buy in year 3 with time value of money, ang benefit mo dyan ay 31. Mas lamang yun syempre na bilhin mo siya ngayon. Kasi mas mataas yung tax benefit ng pagbili ngayon kaysa pag kinumpare mo siya ng bibilihin mo sa year 3 by 31,698, including time value of money. So by in year 5, so 260 minus 200,000. Ang laki, 60,000. Time value of money, 20,000. 200,000 minus 155. 49,054 difference. So yun yung mga i-consider mo sa pag-decide. Okay, hopefully naintindihan natin yung problem. Yan. Okay, so, lipat na tayo balik tayo sa slide. So, we now go to external financing. So may dalawang uri, no? Major. Marami pang iba, but major sources of external financing ay debt financing at equity financing. So debt financing, so ito yung nasa liabilities as side ng balance sheet mo. Equity will be, syempre, the owner's equity. Nasa kabilang side yung assets mo. So nasa right side, nasa credit, yung debt at saka yung equity. So debt includes short-term or long-term borrowings depending on when the obligation will be settled. So that usually is the normal operating cycle, which is 12 months. So if you expect to settle your liabilities within a period of not exceeding 12 months, then short-term yan. Usually, mga short-term obligations ay walang interest unless mag-past due ka, hindi ka talaga nagbabayad, then it's a possibility na magkaroon ng charging of interest. Now, on the other hand, yung long-term borrowings, yan usually meron niyang fixed na interest rate. No? Meron niyang kailangan talagang magbayad ng interest kasi medyo mahaba nga yung period within which the debtor is allowed to pay yung kanyang obligation. Short term, wala masyado yan. Long term, meron. And yung yung long term borrowings na merong interest, ano yan, you are contractually bound to make good, to pay that interest. Unlike dito sa kabila, equity, which is the issuance of ordinary or preference shares or interest in partnership in exchange for cash or non-cash contributions by the shareholders or the partner. So dito, pag equity naman, we are familiar in a corporation, maaaring yan ay ordinary shares or preference shares. Siyempre, yung mga preference shares, although wala silang voting rights, meron silang additional rights rather, na wala yung mga ordinary. Whether ordinary preference share, you are entitled to receive dividends. However, no, it is not mandatory for a corporation to declare dividends. Unlike yung that instrument, you are contractually bound to pay your periodic interest. Yan. Equity hindi. Kahit na mag-iiyak yung mga stockholders. If the board of directors will decide not to declare dividends, then they may not declare dividends. Ganun sa partnership, no? Kapag tawag dito, kapag ikaw ay isang partner in a partnership, tapos meron kang nag-infuse ka na additional capital, or meron kayong additional partner na i-admit into the partnership, then yan ay equity financing kasi may control involved. Yun ang pinakaiba ng debt and equity. Debt usually hindi naman magkakaroon ng control yung creditor. Interested lang talaga siya sa pagbawi ng pera niya together with the interest. While equity financing, bukod doon sa receipt of dividends, meron din siyang right to participate in the management or participate in the affairs of the corporation. Kung stockholder ka, medyo limited yung right mo na yan. So if you want to expand that right to participate in the management of the affairs of the corporation, might as well run for board of directors, as member of the board of directors. Actually, yun yung non-tax consideration dito eh. Dapat nilagay ko lang siyang separate slide. Pero yun yung non-tax consideration. Debt financing, merong interest, merong fixed interest payment kailangan bayaran. Pero yung pinapautang mo will not have a say dun sa management ng company. Unlike equity financing, yan, while the corporation may not be obligated to declare dividends, itong inisyuhan mo ng shares at nagpondo, nagbigay ng additional fund sa company, ay stockholder na siya ngayon. And dahil stockholder na siya ngayon, although hindi niya nga makakompel yung company na mag-issue ng dividends, magkakaroon siya ng participation, right to participate in the management of the affairs of the company. You should consider that. Okay? Cost of debt, no? Interest payment. So kapag ikaw ay magpapautang, expect na meron kang interest. That is the cost of extending or securing rather a finance by way of debt financing. While the cost of equity is by way of dividend payment. So kapag umutang ka kapag umutang ka, magbabayad ka ng interest. Kapag ikaw ay nag-issue ng shares, tumanggap ka ng investment, babayad ka ng dividends. Okay. For tax purposes, ang interest payment ay deductible from gross income. Ibig sabihin, pwede mo siyang i-claim as allowed deductions. And based on our long discussion on tax benefit, yung interest payment na yan ay may tax benefit kasi nga allowed deduction siya. You can claim it as deduction from your gross income. Dividend payments are not deductible from gross income. Therefore, no tax benefit can be derived. So medyo iisipin mo to. Saan ako kukuha ng pondo? By debt, doon ba ako dadaan? Sa liability route or sa equity route? Mamimili ka ngayon. Kung liability ang ipipiliin ko, I will be liable to pay interest. I will be forced to pay interest. Pero okay lang. Kasi yung interest naman na yan, I can claim that as allowed deductions at magkakaroon ako ng tax benefit every time na magbabayad ako ng interest. Kapag pinili ko equity, although hindi ako mapupwersa na mag-declare ng dividend, pero in case na magbabayad ako ng dividend, hindi masyadong beneficial sa akin. Bakit? Kasi yung dividend na binayaran ko is not tax deductible. Meaning, hindi ko siya pwedeng i-claim as deduction from gross income. Hindi niya mabababa ang aking taxable net income at hindi niya mabababa ang aking tax due. So, yun yung point ng tax imprint or tax footprint ng external financing. Okay. Pero, tandaan din natin that under the tax code, merong mga interest expense na hindi deductible agad. No? Hindi deductible agad. Maaari maging deductible sila some other time, pero yung ibang items dito, pero hindi agad-agad. For example, interest paid in advance. So, kunyaring nag-utang ka, pero kinaltas yung interest. Paid in advance siya, kinaltas siya. For example, nangutang ka ng 100,000, yung nagpautang sa'yo, ang binigay lang sa'yo 90,000. Ano nga rin sa 10? Ba't hindi niya binigay yung 10? Interest yun in advance. Pero magkano babayaran mo? 100,000 pa rin. Diba? So, 100,000 yung utang mo, kinuha niya yung 10, 90,000 na iwan na punta sa'yo, but you still have to pay 100,000. Ano yun? Interest paid in advance kasi hindi mo pa nga nakukuha yung pera mo, yung inuutang mo. Kinuha niya na yung interest. Is that already deductible? No. It's not yet deductible. Pero interest yan. Oo nga. But you have to wait until the time na magbabayad ka. So pag nagbayad ka, doon sa time na magbabayad ka, doon mo i-recognize yung interest. But in the meantime na advance interest yan, hindi siya deductible. So you have to wait. Hintayin mo lang kung kailan ka magbabayad and doon sa period na yun mo siya i-claim as deduction. Interest and amortization. So dito naman, magbabayad ka ng interest on bayad ka ng, meron kang utang ngayon and you have to pay on installment. So yung recognition ng interest dyan will be per payment of amortization. Tandaan nyo kapag ganyan yung arrangement, nagbabayad ka ng by amortization, by installment. Meron tayong ginagawang amortization table before. Siguro gumawa kayo niyan sa bonds. Ang ginagawa natin, ina-apply natin yung portion ng amortization. Ina-apply mo yung portion sa interest and then yung maiiwan, ina-apply mo as reduction sa principal. Tapos magkakaroon kayo ng adjusted balance, meron ka uling ma-receive, a portion of it will be applied as interest payment, and then portion will be applied doon sa principal. So ang point ng interest and amortization is that you claim them as deduction every time na nag-amortize ka. Number 3, interest payments made between the related taxpayers. So dito, yung tax code natin, ilabas natin yung tax code natin para meron tayong visual aid. Actually, ang ginawa ko, nilagay ko na lang siya sa Word kasi yung website ng BIR, hindi ko ma-adjust yung font. Okay. So we have here between members of a family. Yeah. So pag ang utangan ay between members of the family, yung interest expense on that cannot be recognized. So actually, it can be recognized, but for tax purposes, it is not deductible. So if you are expecting na meron kang tax benefit on the transaction, but the BIR will later on will discover that the loan transaction is between members of the family, then they will disallow the deduction for interest expense. And what will happen to the tax due? Siyempre, tataas yun. Kasi nag-recognize ka ng hindi naman pwedeng i-recognize. So for purposes of this paragraph, the family of an individual should include only his brothers and sisters, whether whole blood or half blood, and the spouse, ancestors, and lineal descendants. Then, except in case of distribution and liquidation, considered then as related party ang individual and a corporation if the transaction is between an individual and a corporation, more than 50% of which is directly or indirectly owned by such individual. So may nag-utangan si X, for example. X is 70% owner of ABC Corporation. So if there will be a loan transaction between X and ABC Corporation, again, iniisip nila to, pinaplano, kunyari, ako si X, yan. I own 70% of ABC Corporation. Siyempre isipin ko, kailangan ng ABC Corporation ng pondo, may extra naman akong pera dito. Pautangin ko na siya. Diba? Ako na lang magpapautang. Again, I already own 70% of ABC Corporation. Pautangin ko na siya. Tapos beneficial pa sa akin. Bakit? Kasi pag pinautang ko siya, I will charge interest. At yung interest na yan ay interest expense. I can claim it as deduction and it will reduce my tax liability. Tama ba yung iniisip? No, that is not allowed. Bakit? Kasi you own more than 50% of that corporation. You are considered related. And if you are related, any interest expense between the two of you cannot be claimed as deduction from gross income. Prohibited. Bawal. And then, ito na naman, except in case of liquidation between two corporations with a common majority stockholder. Medyo mahaba to, pero yun na lang sasabihin ko. For example, I am a 60% owner of ABC Corporation. At the same time, I am a 70% owner of XYZ Corporation. So 60% owner ako ng ABC Corporation and 70% owner of XYZ Corporation. Any transaction between ABC and XYZ is considered related. So kung sakali magpapautang sila sa isa't isa, any interest expense on the supposed loan transaction cannot be recognized as deduction from gross income. Therefore, there can be no tax benefit on that transaction. Kasi nga, the transaction transpired between taxpayers so are classified by the tax code as related. Okay? Yung sunod dito, 4, 5, and 6, wala na masyadong bearing sa atin yan. Okay? Let us continue with the slide.